Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardwan, and yes, we have pulled the curtains down this evening for a little mood. Bringing in my host, Tulio Vela. Where you been, man?
Hanging. Anytime I can be amongst the best and the leading forensic questions and community, it's a good time. It's a good day.
Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have the final show in our series with the Houston Forensic Science Center. So let me introduce you to our panel. Dr. Peter Stout, once again, you're here.
Hey, glad to be back.
This makes 3 for 3. You're batting 1,000 now with us. You've been on every show. We really appreciate you.
Been on every show. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing back another crew tonight. We got Callan Hundl. Callan, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
And also Lori Wilson. Lori, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for letting us come tonight.
We love having you here. It's going to be an interesting night. We are going to focus, ladies and gentlemen, on blind quality controls and how the Houston Forensic Science Center deals with those. So we're going to open up our phone lines probably about 8:30, maybe a little sooner if you guys want to get in on the action. 713-807-1794 is the number. You can also hit us up on Twitter at HCCLA_TV. So let's start, Dr. Stout, with you.
All right.
Give us a general overview of what blind quality controls are.
So lots of conversations these days in forensics about trying to control for conclusion bias and cognitive biases. So the fact that our brains see patterns, our brains come to the game with biases. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just how our brains work. But when we're trying to create objective evidence, how do we control for that in the process? So there's been lots of conversations about how do we protect analysts from information that could be potentially biasing. And there's lots of different schemes. There's sequential unmasking and all of these various things. There's lots of discussions about, well, if we just blinded everything, so all they get's a tube and they do whatever testing. Some of it's more practical than others, but the idea that we've been working with, and I guess I come to this coming out of the military system, which has run blinds in the testing that's been done on military members for probably about 30 years, is to insert within the workflow materials that are designed to look like a case in every way that we can, and they're put into the workflow in such a fashion that the analyst doesn't know that it's a control material, that they don't know that it's a mock case, that we know what the answer is. And so now they're confronted with work that they don't know whether they're handling a case material or a designed case.
Is that its own quality control team or division, and how is something like that planned and implemented?
Well, we have a huge advantage being the scale of laboratory that we are, that we've got a dedicated quality division that reports to me as president directly, and that's Lori and Callan are both part of that division. So that's where they manage blinds out of, and Callan actually has been running much of the blind design and how we insert those into the process.
What type of background would it take to be a quality control watchdog? Because that's pretty amazing. I mean, you're gonna have to have a lot of skills from a lot of different areas, I'd imagine.
Well, we just kind of wing it.
Yeah.
Nobody trained us for this.
Whoa, okay.
There was no training for this. We just figured it out as we went.
Yeah, I mean, blinds really have been something because there are very few crime laboratories that do much of anything blinded. So the two major programs that I'm aware of that have done blinds at any kind of scale are, like I say, military drug testing, which has used that in the inception of the program that was started in the 80s, and federally regulated workplace drug testing, which there's a requirement under the guidelines that those laboratories have to adhere to, that they run about 3% of the work that comes to a laboratory is submitted double-blinded to the laboratory. Military system, between the laboratories that are in that, they submit about 3,000 blinded samples to each laboratory each year. But you got to keep in mind those are laboratories that are running about 1 million samples a year.
What types of blind samples are being sent, or what kind of plants are being sent? Is it across the board? Are you sending, you have some plants in ballistics, some plants in DNA, some plants in the way a certain protocol is run? And are you all the watchdogs for those?
Yes, so we actually have blinds going through every section except for crime scene right now. So
what would that every section be?
We have biology, toxicology, seized drugs, firearms, latent prints, and our digital multimedia units.
How awesome is that?
So, Callan, you were you're responsible for designing how the blind is made up and how it comes in. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. The quality division kind of brainstorms.
So, how do you figure out what you're going to do? I mean, how do you figure out what it is that you're going to insert into the quality control?
I mean, a lot of it is just looking at real cases and figuring out what kind of evidence they see for their particular section, and just figuring out how we can basically make it look real, but it's fake, and we know what the answer is. So just research into real cases really is where we started.
Give me an example. Like, what's one that you've done in the past?
I'm gonna throw out blood. So you got some bloods coming in, and they're testing for
DNA.
DNA.
We have actually purchased some blood from a vendor, and then we would look into a real biology case, and we would see, okay, they had a case where somebody got beat up and there's blood on a shirt. So we would say, okay, we can do that. We'll just, smear some blood on a shirt and send it through. Looks real, right? Somebody got beat up.
I probably would prick my thumb. And
Isn't that awesome?
but you go out and you buy blood.
I've given a lot, but my blood has not been given yet, but I'm sure it's coming.
See, that would be real dedication to your job if you were willing to give your own blood for blind quality control. So, for instance, on the firearms show that we did last week, what would be a blind quality control that you would have done there? I mean, would you have done it in the ballistics testing itself, and how would that process have looked?
We've done a variety of things in firearms, because particularly firearms and latent prints, there are lots of challenges in there, being the pattern recognition disciplines. How do you design something that's representative of a typical case? You can make, and we've tended to try and design things that are more difficult, because you certainly can design things that are easy. And that's been a criticism of a lot of open proficiency systems, is that the materials that are sent to laboratories that they know are a proficiency, they don't necessarily know the answer, but they know it's a test, tend to be on the easier side of things, and they're not necessarily representative of work. So like Callan says, we try to design things that are representative. So take same make and model of two different weapons, fire ammunition out of both of those weapons, and then a case that's submitted may take ammunition that fired examples from both weapons, mix them up between the two weapons. So you've got same make and model, they're close in all the class characteristics, and then can you distinguish ammunition that was fired between those weapons and submit them that way. We've also done weapons where same kind of scenario where you've got two same make and model of the weapon, two different kinds of ammunition, one that's a better marking ammunition, one that's a not so good marking ammunition, and then submit those as a weapon with ammunition that was fired both from that weapon and not from that weapon in two different kinds of ammunition, and can you get that to match up?
Are the tests, I don't know if I'm even using the right terminology, would they be called tests or experiments or number one, whatever it is, are those designed based on a particular set of standards that say, hey, look, for this particular, if it's ballistics, if it's DNA, are those quality control tests based on some sort of curriculum or backing, or are they a little combination of y'all's experience and expertise along with, backed with proven science? Does that make sense? Like, for example, is there okay, if you're going to test whether or not one gun is shooting this way with this particular bullet, and you're going to plant another bullet, and you're going to test whether the proficiency of the individual who's going to examine the shell casing of that bullet. And it's a plant, it's a test, it's a quality control. Is your examination based on anything, I'm sure it is, but what is it? Or are you just putting a fake bullet in somewhere and seeing if this analyst misses the mark?
It's a little bit of both of those. I think I understand what you're asking. The other thing that we do in firearms, and we're working on how we'll do it in latent prints, is in the process of examining weapons, you've got one examiner that will examine through a case, they'll render their opinion, and then they'll give that case to another examiner to basically rework the case.
Okay.
The typical way that's done in most all laboratories and typical workflow is the second examiner knows what the first examiner's call was and what they did on it. So in about 5% of the cases, we blind the second examiner to what the first examiner did. So it's a blind re-verification. They don't know what the call of the first examiner was, and then we look for, did their opinions agree even when the second examiner didn't know anything of what the first examiner did.
On the blind re-examination of those cases, are they chosen by random, or are they chosen by specific request, either by the defense counsel or judge or any other entity?
We've chosen those by random, and we choose those really to try and be representative of the cases. I don't know, Callan, you've been part of selecting some of those.
What's your thought process and how does it go? Is it just you, or are you bouncing ideas off anybody? Obviously, you have your own internal procedures, but I mean, if it's something that comes to you first, what's your thoughts and how you go about it?
A lot of it is just collaboration with the managers of the section, because they're not doing casework, but they see everything. So for firearms, the manager will see what's coming in and say, I think that's a good representative of a case that we would see. It's not too easy, it's not too hard. And they'll just say, this is a good one for a blind verification. So the people that are involved already know. So they're aware that they're about to be the second examiner, so they know that they won't see, the primary's conclusions. So those are actually worked on real cases also.
Worked on real cases in the sense of how?
That it's just a normal case from a stakeholder, a request. So it's not something fake that we created.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's actually two parts, like he was saying. The blind quality control is, we took a gun and we shot some, bullets, and that's what we created. That's the fake part, but the verification part is done on real cases.
How long have you been with Houston Forensic Science Center? And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit. Who are you? Where are you from? What's your role in the Houston Forensic Science Center? I mean, how was school, spy school or whatever? It's phenomenal.
Wow.
I mean,
I don't know how many things you just mentioned
He likes
talk
to
about,
ask
but
Compound question.
He really does.
So-
he excels at. He's the master of the compound.
I think the first part, really, well, to just explain it a little bit more, we have a quality division that includes Callan, myself, and 4 other people. So Callan works with the other 4 to create the cases, package the cases, create the case scenarios to make it look like evidence coming in off the street. Pretty much what I do is sign the purchase requests when they go to Walmart and buy stuff, honestly. So what was your second question? Short-term memory.
The second question is, can I go to Walmart with you, or you?
Yes, please do.
And we can create some cool stuff.
Yes, please do.
That's the next one to do.
I think I would need a bodyguard next time I go, because I think I'm on a watch list.
Well, I have to ask, how in the world did each of you end up at the Houston Forensic Science Center and this type of position? It would have to be some sort of amazing sequence of events for you to land there, because I would totally quit my job if I can go and do what they're doing. That's pretty awesome, I think.
We are looking for quality analysts, so.
I didn't see a job position.
Yeah.
However, here's the next question. First, we're going to get to this. First, we're going to answer this one.
Not as interested.
But secondly,
I'm not sure he could meet the educational requirements.
secondly, as a defense perspective, I want to know if some of these quality controls don't work. Mm-hmm. Okay? I want to know about them. Mm-hmm. I don't really, whether my case is the 300th case after this quality control measure was in place, I want to know that 300 tests ago, the result was this. Are there bridges being made, and what lines of communications are there with the defense bar, with the judiciary, and with the district attorney's office for that?
I know for my part, I typically write a report of all the blinds we've done on a quarterly basis. So we would list anything in there and explain if there was any that failed. But so far we haven't had any.
So
Wonderful.
If you go to our website where we've got the e-discovery, so HFSC e-discovery and public records, if you go into that and you search, you can just put in the keyword blind, it'll pull up those quarterly reports that list the performance of all the blinds that were run in that last quarter. And then also, if you go to the operations report and the monthly board meeting, the quality report there, they also have the blind status of basically within the last month.
So that's publicly available?
Yeah, that's all publicly available off the website. And actually within that report, it also, so say like drug cases, it's got which batches and which blinds are in there. With the toxicology cases, that's probably what people are particularly interested in. The batch that blinds were in is all listed on that report, so you can tell if if your sample, that's your case, is in a batch which has a blind. And like in toxicology, each batch has at least one blind in it. So we try to schedule these and maneuver them through the process so that there's at least one blind in the batch. So at some stages, our client services group is aware of which blinds are there so that they can make sure they get into each batch as they go to toxicology. But then there are other blinds that they drop into the process that even the people accessioning don't know they're blinds, so that their handling of the samples is tested as well.
Are you concerned at all that the blind quality controls that you're throwing in is taking away from the real work being done?
Yep.
I mean, when we were there for the firearms and the first show we had on the rape kits, I mean, we've got a backlog of stuff and that hasn't been tested. So here you are putting in more tests on an already strained office.
So my philosophy on it is, when you have periods where you've got lots of change and strain, those are the places where there's more likely to be errors. So having more control, even though it does have a cost, is important, because that's when errors are going to happen. So you want more control in it.
And you said at the beginning, can you couch it as bias? I mean, I'm wondering if that's the right word, that analyst bias plays into it. It seems more like that almost analyst laziness would be the more appropriate thing, because
There's that possibility.
it seems like they might just see something that they think they recognize from a prior case. It looks like this. Oh, well, that's that. Got to be that. So not necessarily a bias, just more of a hurry up, let's get this done.
Well, it's certainly one way to try and check for that, control
Yeah.
for that. I mean, you think Annie Dukin, the notorious drug chemist in Massachusetts,
Right.
that was
Right.
dry labbing results
Yeah.
for years.
Right.
How do you try and construct a system that's engineered to be able to prevent that, or at least mitigate that? In my mind, having blind materials that are going through the process is one of the ways in which you can try and control for that. Because sooner or later, they're going to get hold of one that they're not going to get that answer right on.
So I assume a member of your team is looking at the data, but are you just that smart and know every control in every area of examination, and or do you have someone that's actually looking at it, or do you know what the results should be? Because I'd imagine, I mean, that's a lot of testing. Number one, I don't know how everybody reports to you and you keep everything straight.
I got a lot
Much
of good
less-
people.
Military man.
You know, much
A
less
lot
you
of
got
good
this team putting blinds in everywhere, but you have to be able to look at the blind and have an analysis of, okay, this is correct, this isn't correct, this is right, this isn't right. Do you have specialized members of your team? I mean, you said you had a very specific role, very specialized role of making sure that the test goes on right, and then what's your role, and do you have other individuals with their specific roles, and what are they?
I mean, the whole quality division, pretty much just teamwork on the whole process, really. Just whenever we just periodically check and see if the cases are completed, and then we are able to see the test report like a normal case. So we just look at the results there, and then we can look in any of the case documentation to see, did they follow their process correctly, and is the result that we expected listed there on the report.
What background would one have to do this job effectively? Really, I mean, you just didn't reply to something on Craigslist or something. I mean, there's no way. I mean, how did it? I mean, I'm interested. Where are you from? What school did you go to? What's your education? How are you able to look at these things and know them? I mean, or you just?
I'm from
That
Houston,
awesome?
Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went to Texas A&M University, Gigamax.
Gig 'em.
And I have a bachelor's
won't
of
hold that
science in forensic science. And I got a job at HFSC. I started out as an evidence technician.
What's an evidence technician?
The ones that are handling the evidence that comes in the door.
Chain of
and
custody kind of stuff?
Delivering it to the sections. And then little bit later, I started in quality, and I just learned. I mean, we all started the process at the same time, so we all kind of learned it as we went. So I mean, everything changes all the time, so we're still learning how to do it. Really, we're just figuring it out as we go.
And have you always been in the forensic industry, or are you lateral from maybe a big corporate world or something like that?
No, I started in forensic science in 1989.
In Houston?
No, in Jefferson County.
Beaumont?
Yeah. And that was a small lab. And I think one of the benefits to me was because it was a small lab, we were able to cross-train. And so I have a background in a couple different disciplines. And after a few years, I was fortunate enough to become the lab director. So as a lab director, typically in the smaller labs in forensic science, the lab director acts as the quality manager. It's just the way it is in a lot of labs, and that's the way it was there. And so I was there for 14 years, and left there following my husband's career across the state, and came to what was then the HPD crime lab in 2007. My title was actually lab manager, but I functioned as the quality manager. And then when HFSC was created in 2014, there was a whole quality division created. And I think one of the really neat things about us is we are at the corporate level, so we report directly to Peter.
Right.
Which is really important because it gives us, I don't mean authority in a weird way, like we're not knocking on people. I'm just saying we are at the level in the company where we can make decisions and we can do things like the blinds. And I think to touch on what you were saying earlier, I think the six of us in the division, we were a little concerned when Peter first came up with this idea, and we have to give him credit because we didn't give birth to the idea, he did. But because we're good employees, we went with it and we said, okay, we're going to figure this out. But one of the things we were worried about is just what you said. Okay, we have cases that need to be worked. We have different stakeholders calling for those cases we really need it. Are we going to have the analysts at the bench upset with us because now we're adding to their workload? But we started this program in 2015, and actually we haven't found that to be the case. I think because at least in the first disciplines that we brought online, so toxicology was first, and then firearms and drugs followed after that. I think those analysts are just so used to it that I don't want to speak for them, but I don't think they think it adds to their workload. It's just part of HFSC. It's part of our quality division. Posting reports is part of our transparency. I don't think they even think about it anymore. They just work the case that they're assigned. It might be a real case, it might be a blind. I don't think they think about it that much. Well, the only time I think they think about it is
The quarterly meeting?
no, actually it's better than that. It's if they really need a coffee fix, and Peter gives them an incentive. If they think a case is a blind and it really is, then he rewards them. And initially, we were sort of upset with that, but then when we thought about it and realized that that's a great benefit to us and to the program, like, we're okay with that now. We've offered to actually pay him for a few gift cards, but we haven't really done that yet. We just offered.
It's amazing how if you give people incentives, they work really hard.
Well, it's the thing of it that has been my thought with it, and I joke about it, it's an offhanded bet with them. You know, if they find a blind and it is, I've got a Starbucks card in it for them, and if they find a blind that they think is a blind and it isn't, they owe me $1. I've gotten $2.
You can't even buy a Starbucks.
Yeah, I can't even buy it. But I've only given out about 15 cards, and we've run something close to 500 blinds through the system since 2015. But if you think, they're looking at these case materials, and they may be seeing subtle things in them. If there's no real reason for them to actually talk, I think what they just put up is the numbers that we've been running in 2016 and 2017, and then the green bars is what we've been targeting for 2018, which represents about 5% of the work running through. So you can see in controlled substances, which is the really tall bar there, it's close to 400 cases that we need to run through in controlled substances. I think we're about a little bit under halfway, so we're a little short on the year, at least in controlled substances, but it's a lot of cases to run through. You know, we're talking probably running 600 to 700 cases through the system this year to meet those targets. But if they, to give them an incentive to actually tell us what are the subtle things that were the tells. Because I don't want this to be a system that 5 years down the road we think is going great and is helping us control it, and really they can identify what these things are.
Did you develop this quality control protocol or this division based on other examples throughout the country, or is this something that is a product of your own coming in, or is it a mishmash of both?
It's kind of a mishmash. Certainly my experience in the military is really the nexus of coming to the concept of blinds and the way that we're trying to do them. Having a quality division that's reporting to the corporate level, that was really started with the original board of HFSC, if I remember, because that was when HFSC was formed. That was really the board mandated that quality be at that level, which makes a lot of sense. They're separate from the operational production, which means they're managed separately from it. Their incentive structure, if you will, is dedicated to quality, whereas production, all of the numbers that are going to get measured there are turnaround times and throughputs and things like that. So quality is a balance to that and reports at a separate place and is accountable to different numbers.
Is that something that did you bring that idea to the board, or is that something that the board sought out?
I think that was something that the board sought out, because that was before I came on, was the board was setting those aspects of the company up. And basically all I've done with that part is just reinforce it and put more people into quality.
Are your quality control measures similar to those of other major cities, or would you say that yours is, something that you're lecturing about or giving presentations about at the national CLEs, or so to say?
Certainly, the blind stuff is pretty unique to us. What I find, at least in the crime lab world, if there are laboratories that are doing blinds, it's usually 1 or 2 cases a year that they'll put through the system.
Really?
Yeah, and that's...
You've run 500 since 2015.
Right.
That's cutting edge. That's top level. I mean, remember when you came in? Before you came, before.
But that's part of the reason for that. I mean, these are measures of how do we go from what the laboratory was to something that people can trust what the results are. And routinely inserting these in, being able to test routinely, it gives us the ability to do things like we've got, say in toxicology, we test the same material multiple times, different people test it, they test it on different days. So we are getting to a point now that we can look statistically at those results and say 8 different analysts consistently and statistically get the same answer on the same material. We can demonstrate that the same answer is obtained across day, across calibration, across batch, across analyst, across instrument, across pipetting equipment, all of those things, and we can show, we're starting to be able to show that statistically. Ultimately, one of the things that I'd like to be able to do with blinds, and we still are ways from it because it's a big numbers game, is start to actually have a statistically based error rate. I mean, we talk under Daubert criteria of a known error rate,
Right.
and it's kind of not so much of a secret anymore that really in forensics, nobody can really state error rate. We can talk about measurement uncertainty, but we can't really say error rate because
Right.
you're not able to test it.
Right.
But what we're doing is we're putting stuff that we know is negative, we're putting stuff that we know is positive, we know what the result should be, so we can now begin to estimate statistically what that error rate is. But it does take a lot of numbers because we're really looking for very small error rates, which means you got to run a lot of these things.
And if you guys want to join in on our conversation here, you can call in 713-807-1794 is the number. You can also hit us up on Twitter at HCCLA_TV. So you've had 500 tests, blind, and not a single problem.
Oh, we have had things not go as expected.
Okay. But you haven't had an error by an analyst.
We haven't had an error by an analyst. Actually, we've had some errors by quality.
Guilty as
What do you mean by that?
Perfect. I think for a controlled substance case, seized drugs case, we were preparing, we had reference samples at the time we had purchased, and we had prepared methamphetamine powder with something, and I guess at some point something got contaminated, so when the results came back there was cocaine in it or something, vice versa. And we were like, no, that's not right.
You're not buying cocaine at Walmart. So
Not buying cocaine
I
at
mean,
Walmart.
in the back you can find.
Yeah.
But so the 500, and none of your analysts have failed the blind, so to speak, at this point. It's posted. It's posted on your website, so it's publicly available. But I think the question that the defense bar is going to want to know is, all right, that's all well and good. Yep. It's up there. It's on the website. It's publicly available, but that's like going find a needle in a haystack potentially as you get more and more blind quality controls up there. Do you feel like when you have a case that's submitted that you should, if an analyst in the past has screwed up a blind, should you send that to the DA's office as part of the report and say, this analyst, here's how many times that person has screwed up and here's the blind? Do you think it's your responsibility to send that along with the analyst report on the case?
Well, I think short answer to that is yes. If we had, certainly the most troubling circumstance would be something that we had inserted, say, as negative. So, like saying in controlled substances, we try to insert as many negatives as we can. We're actually a little limited on how many negatives we can put in because they start to stick out. We only have about 3% of the cases that come through turn out to be no controlled substance. So if we put too many blinds in that are negative, people are going to start understanding that most of the blinds are negative, and so that kind of defeats the purpose.
You're going to be owning a lot of Starbucks.
Yeah, owning a lot of Starbucks.
Right.
But if you've got a negative that turns out to be something else that's unexpected, why did that happen? And I think it would be pretty quick in the investigation of what happened there that we would end up with a corrective action. As we have a corrective action up there, just like we've got with all the rest of the corrective actions that we have, or quality incidents. Those are on the website, but they're also associated with the report that those cases were affected by. So now when you get that report, you would have that corrective action associated with that individual report.
We oftentimes see new drugs enter the market. Okay?
Yes, we do.
And a lot of them are increasingly becoming synthetics or different. They mimic the same type of drug.
Yep.
And so we'll hear that this particular drug is spreading like crazy, and the labs are all coming back no controlled substance for a limited time. Does the Houston Forensic Science Center have a list of particular drugs that it usually goes through, and then when it encounters something that's obviously something's up, there's a new drug on the market, it's from China, it's some different molecule but mimics the same thing, how is the Houston Forensic Science Center adapting and changing to this kind of new age kind of synthetic drug era?
That is something that all the labs are struggling with, because we went from a world, 5 to 8 years ago that was maybe about 250 drugs, really encompassed the world of controlled substances, and now it could be potentially tens of thousands. And some of them can be identified. There certainly are drugs that it's very difficult to actually say it is that particular enantiomer of that particular compound. And some of those no controlled substances there's something we've been able to identify, but it's not controlled. So it's still a
interesting
substance.
Interesting.
And that is a challenge of the legislative framework to try and stay ahead of these shifting compounds of what now falls outside of control.
If the Houston Forensic Science Center starts to see a pattern of a specific type of molecules, I'm going out on the limb here, okay? And they start to see a repeat of these type of substances that are appearing, are there individuals within the lab that can start to identify or are able to identify with reasonable certainty that, oh yeah, no, this is what it's trying to be and this is the new thing on the market, and are they able to start to search for those things?
Yes, but it can be a lot more complicated than that, because we may be getting information out of those, the data that we can collect on it gives us a picture of part of what the molecule is. It can be, some of these molecules, it can be very difficult, and We don't necessarily have the equipment. Sometimes you'll find a lot of that's done by what equipment called NMR, which you don't find in crime labs very often. But even where there are NMRs, universities, lots of places have NMRs, what we're getting is mixture materials, and it can be a really painstaking process to try and separate that out to get NMR information. So we're working with mass spectral information that can give us some of what the molecule is, but not necessarily conclusively what some of these new molecules are. So it all depends on the molecule itself of how conclusively we can say that. But there's constant conversation between laboratories of, have you seen this spectra? We've never seen this one before. Have you seen this? DEA is continuously working at their special testing laboratory of trying to get that information out to laboratories so that we can try to identify things.
It's a straight movie. This is straight out of a movie.
No, it is.
I mean, I was joking about not being able to pick up cocaine at Walmart, obviously, but I mean, where do you go and get that? Because you've been talking a lot about control and you know, having to, you know, keep the quality control assurance and everything else. But with what Julio was referring to, where you've now got all these possible variants of substances out there, how do you, as the head of this thing, ensure that, you know, what we're getting is what we're actually testing for? You know, I mean, you know, it's kind of like in Back to the Future. Where do you go to get plutonium? You know, I mean, where do you go to get cocaine, heroin, all this to make sure that you've got your testing right? I mean, does HPD provide that stuff for you? How do you guys do that to ensure that your controlled substance testing is up to par?
So that's one of the things that actually was limiting to us at first with the program, because either the substances that we used were negative, meaning they didn't contain any controlled substance. And I mean, it could be anything. It could be soap. We made crystals, like salt crystals, inside the lab one time. But as Peter said, I mean, that's only going to go through the system blind a few times, and then the analysts are very aware, and they're going to know something's going on. So we purchased some, but I mean, purchasing drugs, and especially a lot of the ones you're talking about, I mean, it's, first off, by the time you can purchase it, there's a new drug in town anyway.
Sure.
And it's very expensive. And I don't know, if we set a budget for this program, I forgot the number. So we're to a point now where we do get some drugs from Houston Police Department that are slated for destruction that we're able to use in the program. And so that's one of the things that's really helped us ramp up the number of blinds that we're able to do in the drug section.
Sure.
We also get firearms that are slated for destruction, because if we were to run the same firearm through firearms, the analysts remember them. So we can only run them through so many times. I've been trying to work with other labs around the country to try and work out basically swaps that, you know, say they make firearm cases, we make firearm cases, and swap them. I think that's a little bit down the road yet. I've got a couple of laboratories around the country that I think will start sharing some of the toxicology samples. Those are easier, and I think it's where a lot of places will start. It's easier to manufacture the toxicology samples than some of these other things. So Division of Forensic Sciences in Virginia is one of the labs. Allegheny County is another one. Been talking with Kentucky State Police to basically start sharing some of these toxicology samples with, as they start to think about running blind samples as well.
How big is how big is the forensic science community in Texas? Does every county have one? Is it one every other county? Is it something that's a large network of things, or is it? You know, I'm thinking you're here in Houston. It's top 4 biggest county in the country, top biggest port on the planet. I mean, we're at the center of a big hub of forensic science. Is the network that strong throughout Texas and throughout the country, or is there a few spots that are kind of leading the way?
Texas actually has a pretty tight community of the forensic laboratories. Actually, right now I'm president of the Texas Association of Crime Lab Directors.
Nice.
So there's the 16 DPS labs, there's obviously us, there's the county laboratory here in Houston. There are a variety of other smaller laboratories around the state, and we talk quite a bit.
You know, going back to sending credentials or giving credibility to the weight of reports. You know, DPS sends us, when I request DPS records, they send the CV of the analyst. You know, and I found that to be, well, I guess that's one less thing I have to request, you know. But at the same token, it would be good also to follow up with, and these are the errors or the blinds that you missed or in fact caught, you know. I thought that might be one example of what some other agencies are doing to ensure.
Yeah, I think how we report blinds is something still to work at, and I mean, I think I may have sent you all as we were making some changes to the e-discovery site.
Sure.
But you know, I'd encourage you or anybody else that's out there, if you go to that e-discovery site, if there's things that you're seeing there of ways we can make that site work better, make it easier for people to get the information that they need, if you're seeing stuff that you think should be there, let us know. Tell me, because it's that feedback that helps us improve that site, improve how we deliver that information there.
How many people are part of the Houston Forensic Science Center?
We are currently right about 204 employees. So when you think about the perspective, the national perspective, you ask how many laboratories there are. Bureau of Justice Statistics does a census of publicly funded crime laboratories every 5 years. They're actually setting up to do another census next year. So the 2014 numbers are the most current numbers. There are typically reported 411 publicly funded crime labs in the U.S., like what we are. And there's a bunch that are forensic operations of latent prints or something like that inside of law enforcement agencies that don't get counted. But of those 411, there's only 27 labs that have more than 100 employees. More than half of those laboratories have fewer than 24 employees, and there's a quarter of those laboratories have fewer than 9 employees.
Wow.
So at 200 employees, the nearest I can tell that makes HFSC one of the largest laboratories in the country as a single laboratory.
Sure.
And you're still overwhelmed.
Yeah. I mean, that is actually, there was some testimony at Senate Judiciary Committee just a couple of weeks ago by General Accounting Office that since 2011 to 2016, the federal government has spent $500 million on DNA backlog elimination. And yet the backlog of DNA requests in the country, across the whole country, has almost doubled across that same 5 years. The labs are losing ground on almost every front.
Man, we got a caller. Let's take our phone call here for the evening. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt. Oh, we got some feedback. Hello.
For taking my call. I had a question about the e-discovery that you mentioned, that the reports get put online, and some of the errors that the quality division made. I'm just wondering, do you guys give that information as Brady information to prosecutors in a specific case, or is it just up to the defense attorneys to take on the onerous of digging through things online to find them? And then I had a secondary question about some of the blind tests that you ran. You said that you guys had caught some things that were things that they weren't supposed to be. I was wondering if you could give us examples of things that you have caught, and also maybe talk about the degradation of substances that you run through, maybe narcotics, for example, that you get from HPD, and how degradation works on samples. And I'll take your answers off the air. Thank you.
Thanks.
What's degradation mean? I'm sorry, I don't know what that means.
Well, so one that probably would be, I can see a lot of people being interested in is particularly in alcohols, because I know that's one of the common concerns of alcohol either forming in the tube or declining in the tube. So actually running these blinds, we get some really good data on, because we've got the same materials all made at the same batch, was all then aliquoted out separately, stored refrigerated, just like regular samples. And we're analyzing that repeatedly now over time. And you can see the slight decline of alcohol because it's alcohol. It volatilizes it. And the blood itself is, even though it's preserved, there's still some residual metabolism that's going on. So that's the degradation there. Now, other drugs, there certainly are other drugs that will degrade. They will decompose and they'll turn into other things over time. Most of the drugs that we deal with are really pretty stable. PCP, cocaine, marijuana is a plant material, so you'll see more degradation in that over time. What we've been doing in blinds, we probably haven't run out long enough yet on some of the same materials to really see degradation, because that's going to really be something that occurs over years. So what were some other parts that were asked in there? Brady material of quality incidents. So while we list all of the quality incidents are up on the eDiscovery site, when we've got a quality incident that's associated with a particular case or affects a particular case, quality uploads those in with the report. So when the laboratory report is sent to the investigators and to the DAs, they'll have both of those. So they would have those quality incidents. And if you request a discovery package or a 3914 package, just ask for the lab records around that. Those quality incidents will also be with that.
Have you found, so like you said, PCP, like not that I've ever seen PCP, but when I think of PCP, I think of me watching the movie Trading Places, like Angel Dust. Like that still comes around. Like you guys, this is still a thing.
Houston is one of the places in the country that has a real PCP issue.
Is formaldehyde. I don't know if that's been checked on Snopes and such. That's still around. What about LSD? That still goes around?
We don't see that one very often.
That's what I thought. I thought all the labs were like shut down in the 70s or something.
Yeah, no, but PCP we see that a lot. PCP is one of the top 5 drugs we see in driving under the influence of drugs.
What would you say the top 5 are? I mean, I'd guess marijuana and alcohol.
For driving under the influence of drugs, marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, PCP, and hydrocodone.
Really?
And then alprazolam's up there. Trying to think what there's mostly there's opioids and benzodiazepines are what rank up there pretty high as well.
And you keep records of all of that. Have you seen any spikes of anything?
Well, we're seeing. Actually, I've talked about this a few times. We are seeing a real uptick, and it really concerns me. In 2015, we saw 1 fentanyl case come through controlled substances. In 2017, we saw 13. In 2016, we saw 13. 2017, we saw 24, and we have seen 24 already this year. So we're on pace to double the number of fentanyl cases we see again this year.
On the East Coast, it's taking over towns.
Oh, and it's putting laboratories underwater because they are seeing so many of these opioid cases come in. It really concerns me. We've seen carfentanil, which is the really crazy strong opioid. We've seen that now 5 or 6 times.
But the difference is, there's a little bit a different for accessibility on that side. In Texas, that should be tough to get to, at least as far as being prescribed. You'd like to think. I mean, we don't have this. We do have pill mills and such, but not like pill mills out in Florida, pill mills out in some of these other East Coast. Where are they coming? Do we have an idea of where these things are coming from?
Yeah, I hear lots of theories about that. Texas has typically not had some of the same opioid issues as other places in the country. We've also sat kind of a couple of years behind other places in the country. And my fear is, looking at this pattern of increase, it's coming. But a lot of the fentanyl, carfentanil, and the other fentanyl analogs, a lot of that just comes through the mail.
Well, what they say is so apparently they mix them with heroin.
Yep.
And
and we see what we're seeing more here than necessarily mixed with heroin is it's in pills. So there are pills that are manufactured to look like these. I mean, you say pill mills, meaning like the pain management clinics and things like that. But I mean, literally, this is a garage with pharmaceutical grade pill presses, mills.
Right.
And big fat guy in there with a thing full of stearate, and he shakes his little carfentanil on top of it, dumps it in the pill mill, and cranks out 10,000 things that are supposed to look like oxys.
That's terrible. And they look exactly like oxys?
Yep.
And so the person gets charged with oxys until the lab comes back.
Well, the person actually, out of those 10,000 pills, like carfentanil is lethal at 20 micrograms, a 20 microgram dose. That's like less than a grain of salt. So they shake that on, say a gallon jug of stearate, put it in the pill mill. They're going to crank out 10,000 pills that have nothing in them, and like 10 pills that have a screaming hot carfentanil dose. They get hold of one of those pills, it's going to kill the whole neighborhood.
Mm. Are you in any communication with health departments or other governmental agencies? I mean, is this who are they and how? I mean, because this is a real issue.
It is a real big deal. Actually, I'm going to another community policing event next week to talk to citizens and talk about the dangers of fentanyl and carfentanil and what we're seeing. And yeah, every time we start to see this stuff, we hop up and down It's one of the real benefits. Yes, we've got some backlogs yet in biology that we're working with. We've got some backlogs yet in latent prints, but controlled substances, our turnaround time there is between 6 and 8 days, which really that's part of what's the benefit on this is because we've got stuff that's coming in off the street that we've got near real-time data to go back to HPD and first responders. This stuff is out there. This is what you need to be careful about.
And you're receiving it in all different forms, capsules, pills. Yep. That's phenomenal.
It's terrifying, really.
It's absolutely terrifying.
It's terrifying.
And so I assume that you're reporting back to HPD or the law enforcement agency saying, hey, look, we got this particular type of looking pill. So does the Houston Forensic Science Center prescribe to or make any recommendations or instruct, like, hey, look, if you see these pills or if they field test this thing this way, let's talk about field testing. Does Houston Forensic Science Center say, hey, send us a prelim or go ahead and do this or this is okay or just send us the stuff?
I would honestly rather them just send it to us, and I've talked a lot with HPD of that's really their first and foremost safety mechanism. Don't open the package. The first carfentanil we saw about a year ago was a little dime bag, had 80 milligrams of a white crystalline powder in there. It looked like meth. The officer that found it was an incidental finding at a scene. Officer had field tested it. Fentanyls in those field testers will test positive as meth. It looks like meth in those field testers. So officer thought it was meth. We thought it was meth when it came to the lab. We tested it through, and it wasn't until we were looking at the mass spec going, oh crap, that's not meth. So that officer dodged a bullet. That could have easily killed that officer, having opened that package up, gotten some on their fingers, touched the mouth. That could easily have been a lethal dose.
Is this, you're recounting this as though, do you remember it very vividly?
Oh yeah, it was.
Had you heard about this and were you on the lookout, or was it something that you're looking at and say, oh my God, this is here?
It was the first time we saw it, and when controlled substances came to me and said, we just confirmed a carfentanil, I was on the phone to Chief Acevedo right then.
That's amazing.
Because that is horribly dangerous to the officers in the field if they don't understand what's out there.
Well, so they got this one bag. You'd imagine that there's 10,000 of those other baggies out there too.
Could be.
Phenomenal.
And that one
I think
little bag.
It's crazy for an officer to field test with their tongue anyway.
Well, it's not.
It's like what
it's not so much that they would do that. It's that they get it on their hands. They don't know it's on their hands. Later they or rub their eye. And
it just to me. I've never been a police officer, but I would just not even want to touch this stuff. Yeah. I'd just say, you know what, you guys deal with it.
Well, that was the start of helping everybody understand to have nitrile gloves and have better dust masks.
Yeah.
Also starting to carry Narcan. We keep Narcan. We keep about a dozen Narcan doses in the laboratory.
That's the
antidote.
the
Actually, it's a little nasal.
Oh yes.
Injector.
Yes. And there's a story on NPR 6 months ago how fire departments are carrying it around because they're responding to overdoses.
Yep.
Is that do we see that here?
We do see that here. That's talking a little bit with HFD and HPD. There is the numbers I've seen, and this kind of sits outside of what we do in the laboratory. So most of what I've got is kind of anecdotal. It does look like there's an increase in overdoses even here in Houston, which would match the increase of these drugs showing up.
That's some crazy stuff, man.
No, it's
very scary.
You keep in mind, since 1999, the numbers I've seen between 1999 and 2016, so all the numbers for 2017 haven't been assembled, there are more than 200,000 people that have died from opioid overdoses. 2016, there were 42,000 people alone in 2016 that died from just opioid overdoses.
Do we think that it has to be coming in from out of state, right?
It's coming in from out of the country. Most of the fentanyl and carfentanils, those are coming in. They're manufactured in China, and they come in through the mail.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how them taxes are working.
The tariffs.
Tariffs.
Yeah.
See, I couldn't even nail the joke.
Yeah, we would have put a tariff on something. There's what to put a tariff on.
You talk about jokes. I've been staring at you on the monitor, and I've noticed with the screen down, it looks like it almost looked like the old school Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And I keep waiting for dun, dun, dun.
This stuff's all.
Cool.
It's really good stuff.
I want to know, but we only got a couple minutes left. But I want to know about the weirdest purchase at Walmart and the weirdest approval that you had to give when the check came in?
Just purchase. I mean, spandex pants that look like jeans. Hatchets.
Those are
BB
called
guns.
something. Spandex pants that look like jeans. They're called something. Yes, yes, yes. So I used to have
These
some. No.
these are different than jeggings. These have their own category for sure.
I think when I saw the receipt from that one, what I thought was the combination of things. It was like those and cell phones and a BB gun, and a crowbar and hatchets.
And imagine this purchase with like 4 ladies, one of whom is pregnant, and a couple bandanas and things thrown in. Like, I'm kind of sad I didn't go.
That is all.
Turns out you need a key to get into the gun cabinet. We were probably on the security monitors for sure.
Yeah.
And then the card got denied.
Just bill it to the county, I swear. That's hilarious.
Loss prevention officer, ma'am, you're going to need to come with us.
Like,
I mean,
I work for the county.
We're like, can you murder someone with this? Yeah, throw it in the basket.
No, how about this one? The blood will go that way.
Yeah, exactly. I got some good stuff there.
Duct tape, a hammer, rope, chainsaw, and jorts.
Chainsaw,
Not
we gotta have
jorts.
that one.
Jeggings.
Yeah, we also visited the smoke shop so we could get a little paraphernalia. So that one was a fun. I'm like, just approve that reimbursement. Don't worry about it. You know what my job is. Just
Public
approve it.
records that.
We were all like, who wants to use a personal card? I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah, and if you don't use the like Go phones, and I don't know that that's really what it's called, but if you go to the store to just get a little phone, a little cheapy flip phone or whatever.
We like to call them
actually
burner phones.
Get a burner phone, really, that's what it is. That takes hours to get those phones programmed and get back to the lab.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't even talk about the digital evidence.
No. Were we out of time?
We got 30 seconds left.
Well, I will say, out of everything that they've done, what gets identified on these things is rarely the actual material itself. It's usually the handwriting was too neat and everything was spelled right. It couldn't have been a cop that submitted it.
That's good.
And then when you try to use your left hand, it's too messy. So can't win with them. They're too hard to please.
That's hilarious.
You got to go outside. You got to get somebody else to write it.
I know,
Just
we do,
Some
yeah.
random on the street. That's all the time we have for tonight.
Well, I appreciate being
This wraps up our series with
here.
you.
Yeah, I'm going to miss this.
We're going to have to come up with some
We'll think of some more stuff.
reasons to bring you back.
Yeah.
We need to have a Lucky Ward special at the end, at the whole end of it. Lucky Ward, most notorious alleged criminal in Houston, Harris County.
We'll bring him back for that. I appreciate you guys joining us. I appreciate you guys coming here tonight, and I really thank you, Dr. Stout, for giving us these 3 episodes and giving us access to your facility. It's been really, really tremendous, and I hope you guys, the viewers, have really enjoyed it as well. But that's all the time we have for tonight, so I want to thank all of our guests for joining us, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Reasonable Doubt. Good night, everybody.